So hello and Hare Krishna. My name is Nrsimha. I'm one of the monks from the Happy Jiva Team. And I thought for today's lesson, we could discuss about a topic which has certainly gained popularity over the past couple of decades. More and more people are really getting into it, and that is the topic of yoga. Now, because yoga has been so popularized, it's been really commercialized. There's so many different yoga schools coming up. There's hot yoga, there's cold yoga, there's laughing yoga, there's sleeping yoga. And generally when people think about yoga, they consider people rolling out their yoga mat and stretching their body and making it more healthful, or getting into that lotus sitting position, that lotus posture, and gazing their attention on their third eye chakra. And certainly yoga does have many benefits for your physical body. It does make it more youthful, more healthy, more flexible, and it does make your mind more peaceful and steady. But having said that, your mind as well as your gross physical body, these two aspects make up just one part of what yoga actually is. So I thought today we could discuss about what yoga is from the perspective of the authentic yoga texts, such as the Bhagavad Gita, which is the prime yoga text, as well as its graduate study, the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is like a grand spiritual encyclopedia. So we're going to be discussing about not only about what yoga is, but different types of yogas or yoga schools, and what is the ultimate purpose behind yoga. And yoga is a really nice topic because it's actually, in its essence, it's non-sectarian. It doesn't matter about what your religious views are, your caste, your creed, your background, what country you're from, what language you speak. It's something which is inherent within each and every single one of us, because yoga is not on the material platform. Yoga is actually, it's on the spiritual platform. Now, just before we start, I have to make it clear that this topic can get slightly technical, so I'm going to really need you to focus a little bit. But having said that, I'm going to try and make it as easy as possible for all of you to understand. So let's get into it. All right, so as we get started, first up, here's a lesson for all of you in historical linguistics as to what the word yoga actually means literally and how the word has evolved in our present day languages. So it's something interesting I found when I did a bit of research. The word yoga actually is a word which comes from the Sanskrit language. Sanskrit is a very old, archaic language. It's a language of antiquity. And many of the present-day languages that people speak in the Indian subcontinent, as well as parts of the Middle East, and many parts, if not all parts of Europe, the languages which are spoken in these places have some sort of a relationship in some way, shape, or form with Sanskrit. And certainly many words in English also have their roots in Sanskrit itself. Going by the yoga tradition, the yoga texts were compiled just over 5,000 years ago by a great sage who lives in the Himalayan mountains. His name is Vyasa. So at that point in time, he actually compiled the yoga texts literally in the Sanskrit language. Prior to that, this knowledge of yoga was spoken orally. So the spiritual teacher, the guru, he would speak the knowledge of the yoga texts, and the students would simply learn by hearing, and they would retain that knowledge within themselves. But as I mentioned, 5,000 years ago, they were actually compiled by this great sage Vyasadeva. So for the yoga texts to have been compiled in Sanskrit 5,000 years ago, that means that Sanskrit would have had to have been spoken before 5,000 years for it to have been compiled in such an eloquent way 5,000 years ago. So we can actually sort of gauge the age of what Sanskrit, the Sanskrit language would be. It's certainly more than 5 millennia. going by the yoga tradition. So the word yoga, literally, it means a connection to the divine, or a divine connection. And it's something similar to the word religion. So the word religion comes from the Latin word religare, and religare also means to bind or to connect. So yoga literally means like a divine connection. Now the root word of yoga in Sanskrit is yug, which is Y-U-G. This word yug in Latin becomes yugam, J-U-G-U-M. So what does yugam mean in Latin? Yugam means like a ridge which connects two different parts together, or a yoke. Not like yolk as in an egg yolk, but yoke as in Y-O-K-E. For those of you who don't know what a yoke is, if you can consider a bullock cart or a horse carriage, that piece of wood or that instrument which connects the two animals together, it connects them together, that is called a yoke. So that's what yugam means. It implies a connection. And the word yoke in English has also been derived from the Latin word jugam. And there's other words in English which also come from the Latin word jugam. For example, conjugal, it comes from jugam as well. And conjugal implies an intimate connection between the lover and the beloved, especially in the context of an intimate relationship like a marriage or something like that. Another word is joust. So joust also comes from jugam. And joust means to combine together, to come together for a battle, to join together for a fight. Another word which comes from jugam is junction, which is a connection. Again, it implies a connection between two different parts or elements. And another one is jugular. So the jugular is a part on your body which is just at the base of your neck or your throat. So you have, I think it's on the side of your neck, you have these veins called the jugular veins. And the reason why this area is called your jugular section is because your clavicle, which sits at the base of your neck, which is your shoulder bone, that's actually shaped just like a yoke. So if you see a yoke on a horse carriage or on a bullock cart, it's actually shaped exactly like that. So therefore that part of your body is called your jugular. But in any case, jugam, yug, yoga implies a connection. But what is connecting to what? In a connection, you need two elements. You need one element to be connecting to another element. So I'm just going to read the Bhagavad Gita, because in chapter 2 of the Bhagavad Gita, there's a really nice verse where the word yoga is defined, at least preliminarily it is defined. So this is chapter 2 of the Bhagavad Gita, and I'll just find it really quickly. Here it is. It's text number 48 of the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2. So if you have a copy of the Bhagavad Gita as it is, you can turn to the Bhagavad Gita now. So it's text 48 of chapter 2. And I'm just going to read out the Sanskrit, because Sanskrit is a very poetic language. It's said that it's a very purifying language as well. So if you just hear Sanskrit being recited, you may not know what's being said, what the translation is. Just by hearing Sanskrit, it actually starts to purify your mind, your consciousness actually. So text 48 is as follows: Yogastha kuru karmani sangam tyaktva dhananjaya siddhi asiddhyo samo bhutva samatvam yoga uchyate. So we read the translation of text 48. So the translation is: perform your duty equipoised, O Arjuna, abandoning all attachment to success or to failure. Such equanimity is called yoga. Now bear in mind, Krishna is speaking this to Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita just before the battle is about to start. So there's Arjuna. He's a great warrior, a military commander, and he's sitting on his chariot. And Krishna, his friend, his spiritual teacher and guide, he's the charioteer. He's agreed to be the charioteer for his friend Arjuna. And Arjuna asks Krishna, just before the war starts, to draw his chariot in between the two armies before the war starts. And on the opposing side, Arjuna sees his relatives, his cousins, his uncles, his grandfathers, his friends, whatnot, poised to fight him, even though he doesn't want to fight them. So he sort of breaks down. So Krishna is just sort of encouraging Arjuna to do his duty, and he's telling him, perform your duty of fighting equipoised, O Arjuna, abandoning all attachment to success or to failure. Such equanimity is called yoga. So to be equal in all circumstances, whether it's good situations that come in our life or unfavorable, bad situations that come in our life, when we're actually equipoised and not disturbed internally, that position of equanimity is known as yoga. So that's one definition of what yoga is. But how do we actually be equipoised in good times and in bad times? It's really easy to be happy when you've won the lottery, or things are going really nice in your relationships, you just got a promotion at work. It's really easy to be happy and jolly, but when things go sour, when things go bad, it's really difficult to maintain that balance, that internal stability. So, but being able to do that, that is an aspect of yoga. So I'm going to demonstrate this principle to you through the use of an analogy. So consider a simple farm boy. He's there helping his father tilling the fields, and then he's just having a peaceful life. And then one day, the president or the prime minister of his country tells a nation that, hey, we're at war with another country. So then there's conscription, and then he gets conscripted into the army, gets taken away from his simple daily life of farming, and then now he's on the front lines of the war field at the battlefront, and somehow or other he ends up killing many enemy soldiers. When he comes back to his country after the war finishes, there's a big grand parade, and he gets awarded many medals, certificates, and he becomes a national hero. Fine. Then a few weeks later, when he's reached home, he goes to his local shop down the road, and he's buying things, and then he just happens to get in an argument with another guy, and then they get into a fist fight, and this simple farm boy who has become a national hero, he throws some punches, and this guy who he's fighting with, he drops down dead, which was unexpected. But in both aspects, when he was on the war front and he killed many people, he gets awarded a medal. But when he's at home and he gets into a fight with someone and he kills a guy by throwing a punch, then he gets incarcerated and he gets thrown in jail. So why the difference? Because in the first instance, when he was killing soldiers, shooting at soldiers and killing them, enemy soldiers, he gets awarded a medal because he was acting on the instructions of a higher authority, the government or his military commander or whatever. But when he's at home and he just decides to engage in a fight with the guy in the store, the guy that he's met, and he accidentally kills him, he started that fight and he killed that guy on his own accord. He wasn't instructed to do that by someone else. He just did it out of his own choice, and that was the result of that. So what can we understand from this? We can understand that when we're actually acting in connection with some sort of a higher guide or some sort of a higher authority, then whatever we do on the instruction of that higher authority, we can just be carefree about what happens, because we're not acting for ourselves, we're acting for someone else's pleasure, to fulfill someone else's desires. So whether we come out successful or unsuccessful, we're sort of detached from the results. But when we're acting for our own pleasure in this world, when we're really ambitious to achieve something or to put someone down, and when we do that, we may feel pleasure, and when we don't achieve that, we may get distressed or depressed. So that's not what equanimity is. To be equanimous, or to be equipoised rather, it means to be equal and stable and detached, whether the outcome is good or the outcome is bad or negative. So another really crude, gross example would be something like a father and his really young daughter, maybe 4 or 5 years old, and he takes his daughter to a park and they're playing, and then it's time to go home. So then he holds his daughter's hand and then they cross the street, and just before they get into the car, the daughter hears an ice cream truck, driving down the street, and she asks her father if she can buy an ice cream. So the father, he's a little bit lazy, so he tells his daughter, okay, you run across the street, here's some money, and you can buy what you want, come running back. And as his daughter's running across the road, another woman, let's say, who's jogging, she sees this little girl running across the road by herself, and she almost gets hit by a car. And she goes up to the little girl and she tells her, what are you doing running across the street? Where's your guardian? Where's your parent? Why are you doing this? And she says, I'm not doing this. My father told me to run across the street to buy an ice cream. So who can we blame in this situation? We can't blame the little girl, we would blame the parent, because the child was only acting on the instruction of the parent. So what I'm trying to get to here is that when we actually act in this world, not for our own happiness or distress, but when we act on someone else's instruction, on a higher instruction, then we can actually remain detached and completely equipoised with whatever happens in this world. All right, so now that we understand that yoga implies a connection, we can actually discuss about what is connecting to what. So on one side of the connection, we have 3 different types of bodies. The yoga texts explain that we, the living entity, we have presently in our conditioned state 3 different types of bodies. So the outermost body that we have is our gross physical body. So this is the body that we can all see and feel and touch. It's really tangible. It gets old, it dwindles, it gets diseased, and it takes birth and it dies as well. So that's our gross body. And our gross body, without going into too much detail, it's basically made up of 5 elements. It's made up of earth, it's made up of water, it's made up of fire, it's made up of air, and there's another 5th element, which is also gross in nature. It's also physical in nature, but it's more subtle than air, and that's known as ether. Within your gross body, we have our astral body or our subtle body. That's like our mind-like body. So when you're dreaming at night, that's the body that you go with into your dreams. And that subtle body, it's made up of 3 different aspects as well. It's made up of your mind, it's made up of intelligence, and it's made up of this thing called false ego. So the mind is something like, let's take the analogy of a parent pushing a stroller with their child down a toy store. As they're going down the aisles, the child is yelling and screaming and telling the parent, I want that toy, I want this toy, I want that toy, I want this toy. That's like your mind. Your mind is constantly accepting things and your mind is constantly rejecting things. Now, when the parent tells the child, yes, you can have this toy at this particular time, but you can't have this toy at that particular time or this particular time. So the parent, that's your intelligence. Your intelligence discriminates and controls what the mind should accept and what the mind should reject. So that's another aspect of your subtle body. So that's your intelligence. And false ego is a very interesting aspect of your subtle body. It's the thing which makes you think that you, the spirit soul, are actually this material body. So within your subtle body, there's your 3rd body, which is actually you, and that's your spiritual body. And your spiritual body is made up of 3 elements. In Sanskrit, it's called Sat, Chit, and Ananda. So Sat means eternality. So the spiritual body is eternal. The spiritual body is Chit. Chit means it's full of knowledge, and Ananda means it's full of bliss as well. So it's our nature, it's our constitutional nature as spirit souls to be eternal, knowledge-seeking, and always looking for happiness and bliss, and always to actually be happy and blissful. Now, the false ego is that conjunction between your spiritual body and your subtle and gross body on the other side. It's a thing that makes your spiritual body think. It's a thing that makes you think that you are actually your mind and your physical gross body, even though you're not. So that's one side of the connection. All right, so now on the other side of the connection, there is what is known in Sanskrit as the Param Satyam. Now in English, that translates literally to the absolute truth. So what is the difference between absolute truth and relative truth? Well, here's a simple example. Two hands that I have, I put them together. So it's true to say that my hands are together, but now it's not true. Or let's say if I buy a new car, and as soon as I buy a car, I show it off to my friends and I tell them, hey, check out my new car. It's true for me to say that my car is new, but I can't say the same thing about my car 2 or 3 years later when it's not new anymore. So relative truth is truth which is influenced and changed by time, place, and circumstance, whereas absolute truth is truth which is true and it doesn't change regardless of time, place, and circumstance. So the yoga texts explain that the absolute truth has 3 different levels of realization, or 3 different aspects to it. The most fundamental aspect of the absolute truth is what is known in Sanskrit as Brahman. And if I were to translate that to English, it would refer to spiritual energy. So it's this all-pervasive, impersonal energy, which is not material, but it's spiritual. And I can give some physical or material examples to sort of demonstrate this idea of Brahman, or all-pervading, impersonal, spiritual energy. But they're physical examples. Say, for example, indigenous communities, or let's say tribal communities, whom we would say are not so much technically or technologically advanced. When they look out to nature, like let's say thunderstorms or eclipses or something like that, they would consider these phenomena in nature to be something divine. They would consider these aspects to be even God itself. Or we can look at the pantheists in Greece. They looked to the universe as a representation of the divine or God itself. So for example, when they looked at all the trees and the vegetation on the surface of the earth, they would consider this to be the hairs on the body of God. Or when they saw the sun and the moon, they would consider the sun and the moon to be the 2 eyes of God. Or the running rivers on the surface of the planet were somewhat a representation of the arteries and the veins which are running through the body of God. Nowadays, in a modern context, you might hear people talking about the universe, about how they desire something and they contemplate on something. Let's say if they want to buy something or achieve something, and the universe, it reciprocates. The universe, it reciprocates and it fulfills their desire. So this aspect of attributing greatness or divinity or power to some impersonal energy. Of course, these examples that I gave were impersonal, physical energy, material energy, because the universe is material in nature. But Brahman, on the other hand, is energy, but it's not material energy, it's spiritual energy. So one step higher than the Brahman in realization of the absolute truth is what is known as Paramatma in Sanskrit. So to translate that into English, it would be the super soul. So this is an aspect of the absolute truth which is present in a differentiated way inside the hearts of every single living entity. So for example, I have my soul which is present in this body, in my gross body, and you have your soul which is present in your body. That's why you can understand what's going on only on inside your body, and I can't understand it, whereas I can only understand what's going on and what I'm conscious of in my body, and you can't understand that. However, the super soul, or the Paramatma, is the aspect of the absolute truth, the conscious aspect of the absolute truth, which is present not only in your body or my body, but in the body of every single living entity. Therefore, it's fully cognizant of the thoughts and the desires and the hankerings and whatnot of every single living entity. So that's a higher level of realization of the absolute truth, the all-cognizant aspect of the absolute truth. The most profound realization of the absolute truth, as given by the yoga texts, is what is known as Bhagavan. So to translate that, it translates to literally a person. So you're trying to connect to a person, but that person isn't like you or I, as we presently are. That person doesn't have a gross body, but that person has a spiritual body. And it's easier to have a relationship with a person than it is to have a relationship with something impersonal. Like, for example, air, it's physical, it's gross, it has molecules and atoms, but it's impersonal. We can't have a relationship with air, but we can have a relationship with a person. So the yoga texts attribute Bhagavan realization, or the realization of the absolute truth, as being a person, not just an ordinary person, but a person with a spiritual body. As I mentioned previously, the spiritual body is Sat Chit Ananda, it's eternal, full of knowledge and full of bliss. So to connect with such a person is the most profound realization of the absolute truth. All right, so now I'm going to demonstrate this concept to you through the use of an analogy, and that analogy is that of a ladder, and it's called the yoga ladder. And when we consider a ladder, the purpose of a ladder is to ascend to a higher position, a higher goal, by climbing and stepping on each one of the rungs. So in the same way, we're going to analyze different yoga systems based on a gradual evolvement of your consciousness. Now, this particular yoga ladder, it has 4 rungs to it. The first rung, right at the bottom, is known as Karma Yoga. The second rung is known as Jnana Yoga. The third rung is known as Ashtanga Yoga. You may have heard of Ashtanga Yoga, it's quite popular these days. And finally, the topmost rung, or the highest rung of this yoga ladder, is known as Bhakti Yoga, or Krishna Consciousness. But before we step onto the ladder, let's actually see the type of really base level consciousnesses that people have when they're not on the yoga ladder, but when they're still off the yoga ladder. And the most base level, carnal level of type of consciousness is unrestricted sense gratification. You could call it hedonism or something along those lines, where people just don't care about regulating themselves. They don't care about their health. They just want to enjoy their senses. They just want to enjoy themselves in a completely unrestricted way. And we all know that this leads to a lot of bad things. It can lead to bankruptcy, it can lead to intoxication, it can lead to being thrown into prison. You can get diseases and so many things in this way, and just get burnt up with the whole material world. I remember in high school, some of my friends used to tell me in my later years that every weekend they would just get wasted, they would just drink, get completely wasted, and then they would regret on Monday morning, they would regret, they'd have a hangover, but when the next weekend came, they would do exactly the same thing. So that's what it does to you. Hedonism, it might give you temporary sense pleasure, but at the end of it, you just get burnt up and you wish that there was something else. So that something else is still off the ladder. You come to the position of regulated sense gratification. So before you were unregulated, you're just doing whatever you wanted to do. Now you're more regulated. And if you observe society, you'll find people who are on this level of consciousness as well. They're more cultured people, they're more into, let's say, fine arts, they're more into philosophy, or they're more into taking care of their health, doing exercises and eating the right type of food. Such people who are into regulated sense gratification, They may be more pious and charitable. They may become more religious. But when we talk about religion, mostly religion these days, or what's become of it these days, it's more prosperity religion in the sense that people, they pray to God, they look up to God, and they serve God, but they do it for their own sense pleasure. They do it to get something for themselves, whether that's to be wealthy or to have a good long life or whatnot. But in any case, people on this platform, at least they're more regulated. Now let's step onto the yoga ladder. All right, so now we've stepped onto the bottom rung of the yoga ladder, and that's called karma yoga. And remember, now that we're on the yoga ladder, it means that we're connecting one of our bodies, one of our three bodies, to a certain aspect or aspects of the absolute truth, whether that's Brahman, which is the all-pervasive, impersonal, spiritual energy, or we're connecting with the supersoul feature, the Paramatma, or we're connecting with the personal feature of the absolute truth, which is known as Bhagavan. So if you consider the people who are regulated sense gratifiers off the yoga ladder, when they get a certain urge or develop an inkling to practice and pursue spiritual life because of their regulated lifestyle, when they start to cultivate spiritual knowledge and they start to get knowledge of a certain aspect of the absolute truth, that's when they start the process of karma yoga. That's when they step onto the bottom rung of the yoga ladder. So what is karma yoga? Well, you probably heard of the word karma before. It's a really popular word. It's a Sanskrit word which is really popular in the English language. And most people will understand karma to mean a reaction, to get a reaction for a certain type of action that you perform. And in essence, yes, but fundamentally what karma means by itself is it just means an activity or an action or a particular type of endeavor. And in this world, we're performing actions and we're performing endeavors, we're doing endeavors, and we can't live without performing some sort of an activity. Now, you've probably been in a situation where you worked really hard for something. You really wanted something, you really desired something, and you worked really hard for it. You spent so much time, effort, energy, resources, your money, and because you spent so much time and effort, you expected to get a certain result. That result you may have achieved, or you may have achieved a completely contrary, unexpected result. Like, speaking for myself, when I was in school, I really hated sitting for exams. I wasn't like my school friends who were really laid back and they would just procrastinate and not study. They would just end up studying the night before and sit for the exam. I was really anxious as a student. I would prepare in a really studious way, days in advance, sometimes even a couple of weeks in advance. And I would spend late nights studying and preparing for exams. And because I would prepare for my exams in such a laborious way, I would expect to get a certain type of result. Now, sometimes I would get a really good result and sometimes I wouldn't. So when time after time, when we don't get the result that we desire, it develops a certain type of renunciation or detachment within us. So that renunciation, that detachment to the results of your work, that's what karma yoga actually means. Karma yoga actually means that those who are karma yogis, they're still acting in this world, they're still performing activities in this world, but they've completely given up their attachment to the fruits of their labor. And it's a very liberating position to be in, because now you're just acting in this world simply as a matter of duty. If a good result comes, you're unaffected, or if a bad result comes which you didn't expect because of your action, you're unaffected as well. And that makes you really grounded, it makes you really peaceful within yourself. Generally, karma yogis, what they're connecting is they're connecting their gross physical body, because they're still working with their physical body in this mature world. They're connecting their physical body with a certain level of realization of the absolute truth. That depends on their spiritual understanding. All right, so when a person performing karma yoga gradually purifies their consciousness even more, then they come to the second rung of the yoga ladder, and that's known as jnana yoga. So jnana in English means literally knowledge. So it's knowledge yoga. So the karma yogi, they think to themselves that, hang on, if I'm not in control of the results of my work, of my activities, then why am I so attached to performing an activity in the first place? So what the Jnana Yogi does is that the Jnana Yogi gives up outwardly material activities, and instead they go inwards. They contemplate within themselves, with their mind, about who they are, what is the purpose of life, what does existence mean, what is the absolute truth. It's a very difficult yoga system to perform in this day and age. It requires a lot of discipline and a lot of sense control. And it's quite rare to find examples of genuine Jnana Yogis as well. If I were to give mundane examples, things that come to my mind are people whose professions are mostly just in their mind rather than with their physical body. People who are theorists, I don't know, maybe like theoretical physicists or something like that, or maybe someone like Isaac Newton, who was a great proponent of solitary work. He would just lock himself up for days and weeks, extended periods of time, and just work away with his formulas. So he wouldn't perform outwardly work and endeavors. Rather, he would just contemplate and think within his mind. But that's a mundane example because they're not actually connecting with the absolute truth. The Jnana Yogi connects his or her subtle body to realizing the Brahman aspect of the absolute truth. So the yoga texts explain that a Jnana Yogi, the highest type of realization that a Jnana Yogi can come to, is realizing the absolute truth to be the all-pervasive, impersonal, spiritual energy. All right, so the active principle within your body is your soul or your spiritual body. In other words, without the presence of your soul, your mind is not going to work, your subtle body is not going to work, and your gross physical material body is not going to animate itself either. Now remember, the Jnana Yogi has given up performing material work, but because the soul is active by nature, after an extended period of time, the Jnana Yogi starts to feel somewhat bored. So the Jnana Yogi doesn't want to go back to performing material work, however. So the Jnana Yogi thinks, let me try and find a way to perform work, but on the spiritual platform. That's when the Jnana Yogi rises to the Ashtanga Yoga platform. And what Ashtanga Yoga is essentially a process of discovering who is that person that I should be performing work for on the spiritual platform. So Ashtanga Yoga is considered to be a popular yoga process these days. It loosely goes by the name Hatha Yoga, but in reality, Ashtanga Yoga is quite a difficult yoga process to perform as well. It has many prerequisites. It requires you to sever your material ties with relatives and other associates. It requires you to be celibate, live off nature, just fruits and berries, live in a forest as a recluse, as a hermit. And all this is to inculcate renunciation and detachment from the material world. So it has 8 stages to it, and that's what Ashtanga means, the 8-limbed yoga process. It starts off with yama and niyama. That's 1 and 2 of the 8 processes in Ashtanga Yoga. And yama and niyama basically means do's and the don'ts. For example, do sleep less or as much as you have to only. Don't oversleep or don't overeat. So you have different do's and don'ts. Now, once you get past the stage of yama and niyama, you come to the stage of asana, which basically means bodily postures. So when you see people doing bodily postures in yoga, for example, the cobra pose and the mountain pose and any other pose like that, that's actually this asana stage within Ashtanga Yoga. It's just one of the 8 stages within Ashtanga Yoga. And the whole purpose of the asanas or bodily postures is to make your body fit enough so that it can sit in meditation for an extended period of time. That's basically the only purpose that asanas or bodily postures play within Ashtanga Yoga. After asana, you come to pranayama. Maybe you've heard of this term as well. Pranayama means controlling your ingoing breath and your outgoing breath. and slowing it down. And once you do this, the mind actually slows down as well, and it starts to go inwards. That inward stage is called pratyahara. And after pratyahara, there's 3 other stages called dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. So these 3 stages are just basically more and more intense levels of meditation. And once the Ashtanga yogi comes to the stage of samadhi, that's when the Ashtanga yogi realizes the presence of the Supersoul within his or her heart. And the yoga texts, like the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the graduate study to the Bhagavad Gita, give really nice descriptions of what the Supersoul looks like within your heart. The size of the Supersoul is given as 8 inches. It's roughly the distance between the tip of your ring finger and the tip of your thumb. And the Supersoul is situated within the region of your heart, right next to your soul. So you're not the Supersoul, you are the individual soul. Remember, the Supersoul is present within the bodies of every single living entity, but your soul is only present within your body. So the Supersoul is sitting within the region of your heart, or standing rather, within the region of your heart. And the Supersoul wears a really beautiful yellow garment. The bodily complexion of the Supersoul is said to be like a darkish monsoon rain cloud. The Supersoul carries a really beautiful lotus flower in his hands, and his eyes are also said to be really beautiful and charming, just like the petals of a lotus flower. The Supersoul knows all of your hankerings, your desires, your thoughts, and your motivations. So in essence, the Supersoul is the best friend of your soul, or in other words, you. Now, Ashtanga yogis, essentially they're connecting their gross physical body, at least in the beginning stages of Ashtanga yoga, and on later stages of Ashtanga yoga, when they actually start going into meditation, going inwards, they're connecting their subtle body to realize the Paramatma, or the Supersoul feature of the Absolute Truth. And now we finally reach the topmost rung on the yoga ladder, and that is known as Bhakti Yoga. And Bhakti Yoga essentially means the yoga of love and devotion. It's the most natural function of the soul. And remember, the Ashtanga yogi has discovered within his or her heart the Supersoul, or that person for whom they should be working for on the spiritual platform. The yoga texts explain that the original form of the Supersoul is a person by the name of Krishna. The name Krishna means unlimitedly attractive, and the reason why the yoga texts explain that Krishna is unlimitedly attractive is because he has 6 opulences: beauty, knowledge, strength, fame, wealth, and renunciation. Now, these 6 opulences we have to varying degrees. Some persons may be really beautiful, but they may not be very knowledgeable, and vice versa. But Krishna is that person who has all 6 of these opulences, but to an unlimited degree. Krishna is unlimitedly beautiful, unlimitedly knowledgeable, unlimitedly strong, unlimitedly wealthy, unlimitedly famous, and unlimitedly renounced as well. Now, when you love someone, it's not enough just to say, "Oh, I love you." You usually demonstrate that love by serving that person. For example, you might give that person a rose on Valentine's Day, or you might take care of that person physically. You might serve that person by cooking their favorite food for them. So Bhakti Yoga is a very natural process of the soul, and it involves using your body, your words, your mind, and pleasing and serving Krishna to satisfy Krishna's senses, who is the best friend of the soul. And the way Bhakti Yoga starts, the way the process of Bhakti Yoga begins, is by chanting the mantra, the Hare Krishna mantra. Just like if you want to get to know a person, the first thing you would ask the person is, "Excuse me, what is your name?" So by chanting Krishna's name, that's how one begins to establish one's relationship with Krishna. So the Hare Krishna mantra is really popular mantra. It goes Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And we chant this mantra on meditation beads in a regulated fashion, but there's no strict rules and regulations. We encourage everyone to chant as much as possible. the Hare Krishna mantra, and you'll start to see the benefits within your own consciousness. It's a really easy process. Anyone can do it, of any age, any background, and you get the other exceptional thing about Bhakti Yoga is you can jump directly from the lowest stage of consciousness, unregulated sense gratification, directly to the topmost stage, which is Bhakti Yoga. If you come in contact with a sincere practitioner of Bhakti Yoga, by their influence, then one can gradually purify, or rather really quickly purify their consciousness and come directly to the platform of Bhakti Yoga. So you don't need to go through the whole yoga ladder, which is a really difficult, long-winded process to go to reach the stage of Bhakti Yoga. All right, so there you have it. In today's lesson, we've discussed about what yoga actually means, and we've discussed about the four genuine recognized systems of yoga, which is Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Ashtanga Yoga, and finally Bhakti Yoga. And these four different yoga processes correlate to a gradual evolution of one's consciousness until one comes to Bhakti Yoga. And we also discussed about the ultimate purpose of the yoga system, which is Bhakti Yoga. And Bhakti Yoga means to reestablish one's lost loving relationship with Krishna, who's the master of yoga and the best friend of the soul. And the Bhakti Yogis, they connect all three of their bodies, their gross physical body, their subtle body, and their spiritual body, with the Bhagwan aspect, or the personal aspect of the absolute truth. I know it was a little bit of a technical topic, but if you can understand and if you can grasp the essence of what we were explaining in today's lesson, then you're going to appreciate not only the position of Bhakti Yoga or Krishna Consciousness, but you're going to really appreciate the need to practice spiritual life while living in this mature world. So if you have any other questions, please get in touch with the Happy Jiva monks through our website, or if you'd like a copy of the Bhagavad Gita yourself, you can get in touch with us as well. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Hare Krishna.